So this was a pop quiz which was related to graph, motion under gravity with and without air resistance. The first question, an object is rising vertically at a constant speed. Look, whenever you see this statement that constant speed, so whenever there is a constant speed, what does it mean? What should be the resultant force? There will be forces, but the result of the forces must be zero. Because an object can only move with a constant speed if there is no resultant force act on the object. And the three vertical forces are acting weight. What is the direction of the weight? The weight always act downward. Drag. The drag force is always opposing the motion. So if the object is rising upward, like if the direction of the motion is upward, what should be the direction of the drag? The drag should also be downward. The direction of a drag is always opposite to the direction of the motion. And the upthrust, upward force. So what is the upward force? So upward force is always pointing up. So when we check option A, why option A is incorrect? Because the drag direction is incorrect. When we check option B, that is also incorrect because the drag direction is incorrect. Because the drag should always point in opposite to the direction of the motion. If an object is moving down, the drag should be upward. If an object is moving up, the drag should be downward. When you check option C, the direction of the upthrust is correct, the direction of a drag is correct, and the direction of weight is also correct. But what is the second condition? Because it is moving at a constant speed, so there should be no resultant force. But in this case, what happened? A force of 2 Newton upward and a force of 4 Newton downward. So means there is a resultant force. So this object will not accelerate, this object will not move with a constant speed. It will accelerate or decelerate. Because the direction of the resultant force is opposite to the direction of the motion, so this object will decelerate. What about D? The direction of the upthrust, drag, and weight is correct. And what is the total downward force? 3 Newton. And what is the total upward force? 3 Newton. So what is the resultant force? The resultant force is 0. If the resultant force is 0, if there is no resultant force act on the object will move at a constant speed. Is it clear, this one? So whenever object is moving at a constant speed, the resultant force should be 0. Next question. Question 2. A tennis ball falls from the upstairs window of a house. What can be said about the acceleration if we ignore the air resistance? So if we ignore the air resistance, what we can say? We can say the object will have a constant acceleration. So what we can say about the acceleration without air resistance or without air resistance, the acceleration will be constant, which is 9.81 Newton per kilogram or meter per second square. So acceleration does not depend on the density, does not depend on the mass. It will not increase. The acceleration will remain same. For falling object, if we ignore the air resistance, the acceleration of a falling object is always constant. So it won't change. So when we sketch a velocity time graph for a falling object without air resistance, it will be a straight line passing through origin, which means the acceleration is constant. So irrespective of the mass of an object or density or the space, it will always have the constant acceleration. Question 3, a man stands next to a railway track. A train travels at 40 meters per second. It takes 2 seconds to pass the man. What is the length or a distance? So distance is speed multiplied by time. If the speed is constant, so speed is 40 and the time is 2. So 40 multiplied by 2, we get 80 meters. The speed time graph is used to describe the motion of an object. Which quantities are calculated from a gradient and the area under the graph? So if you have a speed time graph, and we calculate the gradient of a speed time graph. So what the gradient gave us, like we take 2 points, first point x-axis x1, x2, y1, y2. What it gives us? It gives us the acceleration. And if you want to calculate the distance traveled, like if we take the area under the graph, so area under the graph will give us how much distance is traveled. So the distance traveled is given by the area under the graph, and the gradient represent the acceleration. In question 5, a car of mass m is traveling along a straight horizontal road with a velocity v. At time t, the driver of the car sees an obstruction in the road ahead of the car. He applies the brake, the car does not begin to decelerate. So what actually happened, like example, there's a driver and he sees that there's a road blockage. But the moment he sees that there's a road blockage, that time is 0. But what will happen? What is meant by the deceleration, and it's of 2 marks. So how you will score the 2 marks? Deceleration means decrease in speed. In unit time or rate of decrease in speed. So 1 mark is for mentioning decrease in speed or velocity, and 1 mark is for mentioning in a particular time or a unit time. Suggest one reason why the car does not begin to decelerate. Because at time t is equals to 0, when the driver sees that there's an obstruction in the road, he will think that he should apply the brake. Negative acceleration, if you mention only negative acceleration, you will score 1 mark. You have to mention that it is a change in velocity per unit time. So why the car does not begins to decelerate because the moment he sees that there's an obstruction or a blockage in the road, he will think that I should apply a brake. So the moment he thinks, he will take time to react. So the reaction time, or the driver will take time to react, and the moment he is taking a time, that he will cover some distance. That's why at time t is equals to 0, when he sees the obstruction on the road, the car will not decelerate. It will decelerate after some time when he applies the brake, because when he sees the obstruction or a blockage, he will think that I should apply the brake, but the car will continue to move for some time. Then figure 1.1 is a distance time graph for a car at time t is equals to 0. State the property of a distance time graph that correspond to the speed. Like which property gives us the speed of the car? If you want to get the speed of a car, how we can get by the gradient or the slope. Determine the initial speed of the car. Initial speed means like starting speed. So this part. For initial part, because the speed is not constant, the speed is changing. So we'll only take for the beginning of the journey, like this part where the line is straight. When it get curved, we'll not take for that part. Only the region where the line is straight, that region, the speed is constant. So how we can work out, you can take a gradient here using a formula y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So the first point on x-axis is x1, which is 0. The second point on x-axis, that is x2, which is 1.1. 10 boxes equals to 1. So each box is 0.1. So 1.1, 1.2, 1.3. So 1.1, 2, and 3 is there. So x2 is equals to 1.3. Then what about y1? This point is y1. So that is 0. And what about y2? 10 boxes equals to 20. So each box is representing 2. So 22, 24, 26. And I guess this is 28. 22, 4, 6, 8, 8. Yeah. So 28. So y2 is equals to 28. So we use the formula y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Whenever you're using a graph for your question, you should always show this on your graph, like show that how you're doing this part. So it will be 28 minus 0 divided by 1.3 minus 0, because y2 minus y1. So it is actually 28 divided by 1.3. So for especially a distance time graph or a speed time graphs, for a distance time graph, if you need the speed of an object, don't use a formula that speed is distance over time. You're supposed to show, because that's why the graph is given. If you directly use distance divided by time, you'll score only 1 mark here. So 2.8 divided by 28 divided by 1.3. What's the answer? 28 divided by 1.3. So whenever you see a question which is having a graph, so you're supposed to use the graph here, 21.53. So the final answer you will write as 21.53 or 20, because three significant figures. So 21.5 meter per second. Is it clear, this one? So this was a pop quiz which was related to motion, graphs,